Hello there, Professor Torres-Velez here. I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of the what I call the reading hacks. Kind of the steps to help you maximize your studying time when confronting, any sort of readings. So it happens that for this class, the readings are, anthropological readings, historical readings, but these reading hacks should work pretty much with readings from any discipline. So even if you're reading or trying to read or about to read a physics article, which they are infamous for how hard they are to read, with the following technique, you should be able to um, tackle the task and get some meaningful information from your attempt at reading that particular text, whether it's a physics article or a history article or an anthropological article. Okay, but before I start with the actual steps for this hack, there are a few things that you need to understand about how your brain works. First one is that our brains are wired to recognize patterns, okay, and that's very important to understand. In fact, pattern recognition among humans, it's kind of like a superpower that we have, and that it helps us as a species to survive. I usually give a longer lecture along with this reading hacks preview, and I'm gonna do a short version of that. And the short version is the following one. So it has to do with evolution. Humans have been on Earth for about, Homo sapiens have been around for about 150,000 years. Okay, our earlier ancestors, however, the Australopithecus afarensis, for about 3.8 million years. Okay, you can actually go and visit Lucy back in the Natural History Museum, where you can get a rendition of how does she look. The main difference between our earlier ancestors, the Australopithecus afarensis, well, actually, the main similarity, what makes us our sort of cousins, our earlier ancestors, has to do with the fact that during that time, around 3.8 million years, um, the great apes, they divided, and bipedalism was one of the key characteristics. That is the capacity of being able to walk on two legs, opposing thumbs. It's another very important characteristic, and front-facing eyes. But for the most part, our earlier ancestors, for instance, the Lucy, the Australopithecus afarensis that I've been mentioning, they did not have the capacity of language as far as the, morphological record led anthropologists to understand. And so the development of language came a little later on. So I mentioned that Homo sapiens emerged around 150,000 years ago. You also have a similar and also related species of homos, which are also our ancestors, the Neanderthals. These ones, unlike the Australopithecus afarensis, actually had a significant increase in brain size in the skull. And so for this reason, and of course the other reasons being bipedal and have front-facing eyes and opposing thumbs, another very important characteristic of the Neanderthals was that they actually control fire and tool making. Actually, tool making was also part of the repertoire of the Australopithecus afarensis. And why am I talking about freaking evolutionary theory with humans? Well, because an important part of evolving as eventually us humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, had to do with the capacity to recognize in the environment signs of danger and signs of where the food can be found, and that of course means that we develop from really really early on again the pattern recognition, meaning being able to look, scan the landscape, and by very subtle signs figure out what areas of your landscape were dangerous because perhaps there were some predators around, or areas where food could be found. And so eventually it was precisely this need to recognize patterns in our environment in order to survive that eventually led to language. I mean, the story is way much more complex than that. I'm just kind of simplifying it, but the point I'm trying to make in here is the following one. One, we have over 3 million years, perhaps even more if we take our even earlier ancestors, about 7 million years ago. So we have about 7 million year development of the superpower, the pattern recognition one, which it's wiring our brains. And what that means is that our brains are prompt to recognize patterns spatially, meaning in space, because originally that's how we were able to survive. So with that knowledge, I'm gonna now go ahead and explain what's the relationship between that and maximizing your time while reading. Well, think of any text as a landscape, as a space, that has different features that you can recognize if you set your mind to do so. And the reason to kind of think about the text as a landscape is that like when you are walking through the woods, and you don't want to get lost, right? What you do is you usually look for signposts, that is things that are that stand out within the particular environment you might be walking through. It could be like a very tall tree, or it could be like a bush of flowers, or it could be a river, or it could be a path, right? We tend to look for those landmarks so that we don't get lost when you're taking a walk for on the woods, or even in the city, right? If you're in the city, it's a new city, you're walking around. I mean, nowadays we have GPS, which is a great advantage, but not too long ago we have no GPS, so it really depended on our brains to be able to kind of remember where the heck are we and where we're going, right? So anyhow, so I want you to approach any reading as a landscape, okay? And within that landscape, you ought to identify points of relevance to whatever is that you're doing. In this case, is a reading about the Bronx. Well, you want to be able to, once you read this thing, find the information, the useful information that you need quickly. And the best way to do that is, of course, identifying what that useful information is all about. And so here are some of the steps. I'm going to break it down very, very simply, very, very quickly. All right, so here we go. Listen. We're all super busy, right? I don't know about you, but I have kids, I have a job, and I have a gazillion things to do. Often my time is rather limited, and of course, I need to maximize my time the better I can, so that I can accomplish everything that I set myself to do. For that reason, before you confront any sort of text, right, any reading, any article, any book, the first question you need to ask yourself is how much time do you have available at that particular moment that you're going to be sitting in, right? Sometimes we do have a little bit more time, we have a couple hours, and that's phenomenal. If you have the 2 hours to complete a given set of readings, phenomenal, go ahead and do it, right? But, if you, at that particular moment, might not have the 2 hours and you might only have 50 minutes, well, there are things you can do that can get you a great deal of information in a very small amount of time. So let's think about in at least 3 frameworks. You have the 50-minute framework. If you have that time, you can do stuff. If you have a little more time, let's say 30 minutes, you can do a set of other things that will give you even more from the readings. And then if you have the, whatever, 1 hour or more, then you could actually dive in and read the whole thing. Often, however, even if you go and read the whole thing in one sitting, if you do not develop a set of strategies to mark, those landmarks that are important with the information that might be relevant to you, then I mean the investment in the 2 or 3 hours investment in a reading might not yield all that you need, because if you didn't took the time to properly reference the key parts within a text, it's kind of like a lost time, right? Because you didn't get the time to underline and mark and signal where the important pieces of information are. Okay, so here are the strategies. First thing you need to do is find and read all the metadata. Metadata. What the heck is that? Well, that's just information about the text you're reading. The title, for instance, is metadata. The author's name is metadata. As we can see in here, I'm showing you the introduction. I mean, the book cover of one of the books that you're supposed to be reading. We have the title is metadata, the author's name is metadata, the publishing press is metadata, where it was published is metadata. That is information that is about the text. It's not necessarily content on the text, but it's about the text, right? What other sources of information are useful? What other sources of metadata are useful? Well, of course, the date it was published. That's kind of important. You see it in there. Right, so it's all of this metadata gives you information about the text that might already prime your brain to be more receptive and more and pay attention to some pieces of information that otherwise you wouldn't be primed to if you were not to engage in this exercise of identifying all of the relevant metadata information. What other relevant metadata information do we need? Well, in this case, the fact that this is a book as opposed to an article or a newspaper journal, a newspaper article, it's also metadata, right? So the genre of writing, of the writing that you're reading is important. In this case, like in most of my classes, what I use are academic books or academic, journal, peer-reviewed journal articles. Every now and then I might use a couple of newspapers, and a bunch of videos, YouTubes and TED Talks and all of that. Of course, each one of these type of content has more validity. There's a hierarchy of validity and legitimation on each one of these sources. At the highest end of the validity or legitimation of a piece, you have, for instance, academic peer review articles. Those are articles that are written by experts for experts. That is, people that have spent many, many years of their lives studying a given topic, who write about it, do research about it, write about it, and then other experts get the chance to review it and address any any mistakes or errors that might be addressed. And the importance of this is that academic articles are the gold standard for information, to be valid. As opposed to, for instance, a freaking Facebook post or Instagram post or whatever. People often post all kinds of information in those social media platforms, and more often than not, actually over 90% of that information has not been validated, has not been researched. It's just hearsay, which is of course problematical, because then you are getting false information, and so that's why when you want to find out about something, when you want to find out something about a specific topic, the best sources of information often are academic pieces. Of course, the problem with academic pieces is that they tend to be a little hard to read, right? They're not written for a general public, and that's why sometimes I include newspaper articles. Now, not all newspaper articles are equal, right? I mean, I don't know, New York Times, they tend to have a slightly more rigorous approach, and there's some newspapers, like, I don't know, the Guardian, for instance, which is a British newspaper outlet. Those tend to be very good. They tend to be written by academics, even though they write them in sort of a more lay language so that people can understand them. And so it's also very important when you're consuming content to understand the metadata about that content. And that's why I keep saying that you need to kind of understand what sort of piece you are reading, right? Not just dive in and start reading without understanding from where that particular content came from, who produced it, what institutional affiliations are backing it up, so on and so forth, right? This is about engaging in a critical fashion, right? It's critical thinking. It's being able to assess whether or not a reading has valuable information that has been vetted and has been confirmed, as opposed to just people rambling and just making things up. Okay. So find the metadata. So genre, right? What type of writing? In this case, it's a book. What other source of metadata? Titles. Author's name, year of publication. Publishing house. That kind of stuff. All right. So that's step one. Find and read all the metadata. Step two. Well, the step two, in this case, is a book, right? So it'll do you well to make sure to kind of look at the index. At the table of context. In this case, we can tell that this book has 8 chapters. It has, of course, the bibliography, which is very important. Those are the sources from which the author is pulling from information. You have an index for quickly finding, concepts and whatnot. The notes, which are the expansion on certain topics that the author wants to expand on at the end. And the chapters, acknowledgement tables, all of that jazz, right? So make sure you just take a little time and read all of the chapter titles, and that will give you already a sense of, kind of like the skeleton of the piece, right? This is the books has it easier for you because they're already giving you a snapshot of what you're going to be seeing. Often in academic articles, you will not have an index like this, but what you do have is headings and subheadings. And what you need to do is to make sure before you start reading anything, right? Before you start actually reading the content of the text, make sure you read all of the titles and subtitles. It'll be akin to reading the table of content, and the main reason to do this, as I mentioned, is to give you an overview of where the author is going to get you from point A to point B. That already gives you an idea of where the author is studying. It's give you an idea of the story line the author is proposing, right? So in here we have, for instance, the Bronx and its neighborhoods, early beginnings, the changing landscape, emerging neighborhoods, boasting a borough, urban neighborhoods, the South Bronx, and the road back, right? So it's giving you already a sense of where this thing is going through, okay? So that's step one. That's step two. So step one is read all the metadata. Step two is read all the subtitles. Step three, right? And we are right now in the 15 minutes hack. Right? If you only have 15 minutes, this is what you ought to do. Check the metadata, step one. Step two, read all the subtitles. All right, titles and subtitles. All right, you still have time, right? This only took a few minutes to figure it out. All right, so step three for the 15-minute hack will be to find the introduction. Read the introduction, right? On books, introductions are fundamentally a chapter, so that might take a little more time than 15 minutes. But when you're reading, for instance, academic articles, often the introduction is not that long. It can be a couple pages, at the most. So make sure you read the introduction within those 15 minutes. Also, and this is the last step for the 15-minute hack, read the conclusion. You see, by just doing this, by finding out and reading all the metadata, right? What is this piece all about? By reading titles and subtitles, yes. By reading the introduction and reading the conclusion, you already have enough information to sit down and be able to tell me, what do you think this article is about? Which is basically what I'm asking in my journal entries, right? When I'm asking you, please, submit a paragraph for the journal entries where you pinpoint to what stood out to you. This is all. You can actually sit down and write something. It's like a 250 words a paragraph. It's very, very short. It's like 4 sentences or 5 sentences at the most, right? And you can most definitely write that by just investing 15 minutes to do these steps, all right? So that will be your first approach if you don't have a whole lot of time. Okay. Now let's say that you have not 15 but 30 minutes. Wow, that's even better, right? You already did, what I told you on the 50-minute hack. You happen to have another 50 minutes, right, for 30 in total. Then what you need to do? Well, if you have that little extra time, what you need to do is to read the topic sentences and transitional sentences on each paragraph. What does that mean? Well, a topic sentence, each paragraph, if a writer is a good writer, right, each paragraph usually will address one topic. And usually that topic is stated within the topic sentence, which is the very first sentence of a paragraph. Transitional sentences are those that kind of end the paragraph and link the former idea with the next idea. So it is useful to also read the last sentence of a paragraph to see what the author is connecting. All right, you get my fear, right? So you don't have to read the whole thing, not the whole paragraph even, I'm telling you. Just read the first sentence and the last sentence, and you will get an idea of what the general topic might be. If you do that on a 17 pages article, just to give you an example, you most definitely will be able to read first sentence, second, first topic sentence, transition sentence on each paragraph, and get a pretty good sense of what the author is doing. All right, and of course, especially because you already read the introduction and the conclusion, you see what the author is pulling from and what are the sort of references using. So that will be my other 30-minute hack, right? So just to sum up again, the 15-minute hack is you only have 15 minutes. Make sure you address metadata. Make sure you read all titles and subtitles. Yeah. Make sure you read the intro and conclusion. In articles, it's just one paragraph or two at the most. In chapters, might be a little longer, but it's still doable, right? Still doable within 15 minutes. Yeah. And then you can actually sit down and write. That's 15-minute hack, right? The second hack is a 30-minute hack, right? You do all of what you've done in the first hack, and in addition, you simply read topic sentences and transitional sentences. Boom, you got a ton of information already. Now. And I haven't mentioned this before, but it's important. And here you see I'm doing some underline. Let me tell you something about underline. Underline is very useful. Really, it's not. Sure, it's a landmark. It's kind of highlighting what where important information, where what you think is important information might be, so that you can find it easier next time. But if you don't take the time to put maybe a concept, a word, something that kind of sums up what that sentence is about, then you're doing a disservice to yourself, because then you will have to go back and sure, it's highlighted, but you still have to read the whole thing. If you would have taken, a minute and put in there, like a word that will kind of like anchor the meaning of that sentence, then, that will be useful. So for instance, this is an example. You have all of that sentence, blah, 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 blah. What did I put in there? 1914, Bronx becomes the borough. Boom. You see, by just taking the time to summarize that, the information that was relevant for me from that paragraph, I put it in the margin, I already have it. I don't even have to read the whole thing again. By just looking at that, I already know. Bronx, borough, 1914. Boom. Done. If you keep doing that, you see like in here, did the same thing. Fast in urban growth in the world, Bronx, 1880 to 1930. Boroughs, boom, boom. You see, I already sum all of that in just a few words. And if you take the time to jot down, in a very concise fashion, a couple of words, 3-4 words at the most, a sentence at the most, then next time, let me explain what's happening in here at a sort of neurobiological level. What you're doing in here is Well, first you are underline, which is again it's a useful step, but not sufficient, right? If you want to really anchor that information in your brain, what you need to do is you need to engage in the process of translation. What does that mean? Well, you're basically translating what the author is saying in your own words, and by doing that, you're owning this information and therefore anchoring it into your brain, into your neurons, allowing your brain and the information to pass from short-term memory to long-term memory, right? So how do you do that? By anchoring. How do you anchor? By translating. How do you translate? By putting in your own words. Be as concise as you can, right? The point in here is to do it quickly, not to write a whole essay on the margins of the book. Just a few words to give you an idea of what it is, and I'm showing you here my own notes, so that you get an idea. I don't think I included on this particular text. Uh, uh, Little drawings, but that's another phenomenal way of engaging the abstract thinking part of your brain. In bright space, I put a legend of little icons that I drew, by hand, kind of like a shorthand. Think of it as emoticons, right? It's a shortcut to things that you will be using a lot when you are analyzing a text. So, for instance, when I read stuff, often I get really, when the author says something I don't agree with, what I did? I wrote a little trash can with, a little smelly trash can. Like I literally wrote one, right? And I have that icon that I developed, right? And, I drew it. And when I'm reading stuff like that, instead of saying, this is bull, I just do a little icon, and that little break for you to to um, to draw takes you engage the other part of the brain, right? And by engaging the other part of the brain, you are actually anchoring the information. So, develop a few of those emoticon like icons of things that you use a lot. So, for instance, when I like a lot something, I can do like a happy face, or, just come up with your own repertoire of icons to populate your readings. And I'll assure you, if you do this, the information will anchor. And the advantage is that once it is anchored, you don't have to reread the whole thing, for the time of the exam. All you have to do is flip through the pages. You'll see your notes. You'll see your little icons. You'll see your, translations, and the information will get reinforced because the network of synapses will get reactivated at a quicker pace than if you were reading the whole thing again. All right. So notes at the on the margins are super important, more so than simple underlines, okay, and color coding and all that jazz, right? And then finally, if you have 1 more hour, 1 hour or more, then you can go ahead and read the whole thing, right? And because you engaged previously in this series of steps, it'll become super quicker to cover the material. One last thing I want to add about this, right? That this idea of reading a paragraph and then summarizing it, or a couple paragraphs and then summarizing the main ideas. Once you're engaging them, then when you sit down to write the summaries, it's going to be super easy. Something else I want to add is that when you read let's go back to the table of content quickly here. Table of content. When you read a title and a subtitle, not just read it, try to place it within the larger context and maybe pose yourself a question. What does the author means by I don't know, the changing landscape, and as soon as you move from reading a subtitle to wondering the meaning underneath, your brain automatically would shift gears. It will shift gears, and it would be primed to seek the information or the answer to the question you just posed. Why am I saying this? Because once you get the brain to wonder, you know, why is this in this way or that in that way? That is when once you get your brain to pose a question, your brain automatically will desire to find an answer. You get me? So it's like kind of when you're scrolling, and that's why social media is such a trap for people, because social media, you know, they have a bunch of psychologists and neurologists informing the user interface of these apps. Let's take for instance, Instagram. You know, Instagram, that whole thing of flipping and flipping. You know, the reason why you keep scrolling, you know, has to do with the fact that you get a dopamine hit, meaning you derive pleasure by finding out what's the next juicy piece of information. The next scroll might not be good, but your brain is already primed to look for the next one, and you keep doing it. And that's why people get stuck, like scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, because our brains are wired to be curious, and the more new information we're getting, the more our brains desire for more. And so we're taking, that, and we're trying to apply it to something more meaningful than freaking, social media, right? That's applying it to the readings. All right, folks, that's all for me today. I hope you got the steps. I'm gonna say them one more time, and then I'm gonna close. Reading hacks, the steps. If you have there's 3 reading modes, if you will. If you have 15 minutes, if you have 30 minutes, and if you have more than an hour, right? If you have just 15 minutes, do the step 1, find metadata. Step 2, read all of the subtitles. Step 3, read introduction. Step 4, read conclusion. That's with 15 minutes hack, right? Those 4 steps. If you have 30 minutes, then you do all of what you did on hack 1, and in addition, you read topic and transitional sentences and paragraph throughout, right? That's for 30-minute hack. If you have 1 hour or more and you already completed those 2 first reading modes, then you move on to read the whole thing. But make sure that, doesn't matter what reading mode you are, make sure you are engaging in writing on the margins. Not just underline, right? But include keywords, include translation, meaning how do you come to understand that particular paragraph in your own words. And I assure you, if you do this, you're gonna cut down your study time significantly, and yet the outputs of your efforts are gonna tenfold. You will reduce your study time significantly, and you're gonna maximize it. All right, folks, that's all for me today. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you next time.